Okay, you guys wanna? All right. Okay, I'm gonna call this joint meeting of the Carmel Planning Commission and the Forest and Beach Commission together. Can we have roll call, please?
Absolutely. I'll start with the Planning
Or do we?
Commission.
Go ahead. What?
I'll start with the Planning Commission.
Okay.
Commissioner Alborn.
Here.
Commissioner Allen. Here. Commissioner Karapetkoff.
Yeah.
Commissioner Locke.
Here.
And Chair LePage.
Here.
All right, and for the Forest and Beach, Commissioner Burling.
Here.
Commissioner Brzezowski.
Here.
Commissioner Ross.
Here.
Commissioner Rutta.
Here.
And Chair Mitchie.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, I want to welcome you all today. This is a little different for us. It's nice to have the two commissions together. Okay, the first item after the roll call is public appearances. So at this time, any members of the public can speak to the Planning Commission or Forest and Beach on any matters which are not on our agenda today and are of municipal concern. I want to remind you that we are under the conditions of the Brown Act, and so I want you to all know that you must abide by that. So at this time, I want to invite anybody from the public who wants to speak to us about any matters of municipal concern which are not on our agenda today. Any hands up online? Okay, nobody here in the chambers stepping up, so we will move on to the orders of business. And today we have a report on the Carmel Sea Level Rise Draft Adaptation Pathways Report. So can we have the staff report, please?
Good afternoon. I'm Mary Bilsey, the Environmental Programs Manager, and I am basically going to just introduce the consulting team. We have EMC Planning Group as well as Integral, who both prepared the study, and they will do an introduction, a little bit of a background, and then we will go into the actual adaptation study. And they will break in there for questions, and then we can come back and if there's any additional questions. There isn't an action that we're going to be taking, it's just a presentation, information, and then a discussion. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair of the Planning Commission, Chair of Forest and Beach, and members of both committees and commissions. I'm Anastasia Aziz with EMC Planning Group. I'm a principal, and I've been working with the city on this long and involved complex project, and I've been before you a few times. I also have with me Esme Wall, Senior Planner with EMC Planning Group, who's helping. And then we have staff from Integral, Dave Revel, who's a principal and geomorphologist, right? And Matt Jameson, a Senior Scientist with Integral, and also Ruben Vrugnik, a scientist with Integral, and they will be presenting the more technical information. So with that, next slide. Which is, oh, come on. Oh, it's not showing. Oh, wait. Oh, there. There we go. Okay. Just briefly, the background. I know I've been before, I think both of you before, but what is a local coastal program? Just for the record, it's the city's planning document that governs development in the coastal zone. And in the case of Carmel, the entire town or city is within the coastal zone. Not all cities are like that. Some, only a portion are in the coastal zone. But in this case, the entire city is governed by this document as well, which is part of the, or required by the Coastal Act. So why a local coastal program update? The Coastal Commission requires that local coastal programs be updated to consider sea level rise. The city's current, I'll use the acronym LCP, or Local Coastal Program, does not include sea level rise projections or identify what we're calling adaptation pathways, or a way to adjust to the changing levels of the ocean and storm surges. And the associated erosion with that. So that is what this whole effort is to do. And there was a Senate Bill 272 that was passed that requires coastal communities to adopt sea level rise plan by 2034. So Carmel's, very well positioned to do this, and this whole effort is grant funded. And just shows where we are in the process. There were technical studies, existing conditions done, and many of this, or all of this is on your website as well, the city's website. Feasibility studies done, socioeconomic analysis, I think that's the latest one we were before you with. And now we're back before you with adaptation pathway development to hear your comments on that. And you'll see the community engagement along the bottom. We've had various different, in addition to meetings with the Planning Commission and Forest and Beach, also workshops with the community, and most recently a survey that was out that recently closed. And now we're before you with the adaptation pathway development to get your feedback on that before we move into proposing policies for your consideration. And with that, I will pass it off to Dave Revel.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. David Rebel with Integral. We started working with the city in 2022, so we're well into the project. And what we're going to present is sort of the culmination of all of the science and socioeconomic analysis, and sort of come up with a plan on and recommendations on where do we go from here. So I am going to cover I'm going to go through the first part pretty quickly because it's a review, if you will, of sort of some of the key findings that are leading us into some of the proposed actions. So we've kind of divided the city into the sort of three planning areas on the beach, sort of the North Beach and North Dunes, that includes the Del Mar parking lot, the Del Mar Dunes and Central Beach, which is, sort of that access, and the 8th Street or 8th Avenue emergency access, and some really important, like a pump station and some other really critical infrastructure. And then the biggest sort of project area is sort of the South Beach and Scenic Road corridor. And so we have come up with sort of very specific recommendations for each one of those, as well as following upon the detailed sort of findings. We did look at future coastal erosion projected with and without the existing armoring in place. We looked at what the beach how narrow the beach would get over time if the armoring is maintained, and as sea level rises, we're going to squeeze the beach out unless we do something. And that doing something is adaptation, which we're really trying to get into here today. We looked at where wave overtopping and potential erosion risk is going to increase with sea level rise. Right now, when waves hit the seawalls, they kind of come up, and maybe some salt spray will spray and cause some small failures in the softer material above it. With sea level rise, those waves will not just go vertical, they'll start going horizontal and eat into more of the bluffs, causing more failures that would affect infrastructure, scenic drive, things like that. And we've kind of done a very specific, very detailed mapping along the entire short beach and coastal area, and highlighted some of the key infrastructure, obviously access ways, utilities, parking lots, things like that. There's a lot of detail in here and in the various reports. This is some of the key areas of risk in the south, sort of with just 1 foot of sea level rise, sort of some water supply, access ways. With 2 feet, there's a bunch more of the impacts to scenic road and different accesses. Again, this is really a review, and we're not going to be able to get into all the detail here, but I just want to kind of show you the thought that we've gotten to make these recommendations to try and avoid and adapt to this, so we avoid a lot of these impacts. Then we get into with 2 feet, then with 4 feet, most of the cliff back shoreline, there's 44 homes could potentially be impacted. either with flooding or with continuing erosion. Wave splash and wave flooding and overtopping, hitting a building is clean upable. Eroding the foundation is not clean upable. We're not building more land necessarily. So different impacts require different types of adaptation. And then basically all of the beaches with 4 feet of sea level rise would likely disappear except for some very small pocket beaches. I'm going to go through some of the strategies, and I know that's a lot. That it is a review of 2 years in about 3 minutes, so please dig into that more. And we can answer some of the questions, but we're trying to go, what's going to happen if we do something, and what can we do? And we have talked with Coastal Commission staff, and so all of these options that we're presenting today are potentially viable. How they're implemented, the specifics about what's integrated that is public supportive, all of those will determine how easy it is to permit. One thing I want to make a real clear distinction is the benefit of going through this process and then going through the next 2 phases of updating the local coastal program is it allows the city to have more discretionary approval of actions in the city and not have to take everything to Coastal Commission. And so as we chart a path forward and develop some monitoring programs and some other things, technical studies that inform what the city might want to do, the more we get done and get into the local coastal program, then the city can permit staircase repairs really quickly. And so the frustration that we've heard in the community about when are the stairs getting fixed, that can be expedited to some extent once we get some of these policies set and some of the monitoring plans and things we've been working on. So there is a benefit of going through this long process, and that's one of them. So everybody who's frustrated the stairs aren't open yet, we're working on it.
Can I ask a quick question? Do you want us to wait?
Yeah, I'm gonna go through a couple, I'm gonna stop before we get into the adaptation. I just wanna present what are some of the options that are possible, okay? And yes, I will slow down a little bit here, but still go pretty quick, and then we'll pause and get everybody questions answered and then dive in deep, okay? So within the range of adaptation strategies, we can do nothing, and that's a choice. We can protect, and that can either be coastal armoring, seawalls. It can also be beach nourishment of the sand ramps. Accommodation, which is like setbacks of buildings or elevating, is not as applicable here in Carmel because it's pretty built out already, and it's not necessarily low-lying flooding issues that are the problem. So, and then there's retreat, and in Marina, it's Stillwell Hall. This is a great example. You can see what happens when you armor the coast, erosion continues, sea level rises, there's no beach there. When it was turned over by the military to state parks, and they took the armoring out, the beach came back. The erosion was allowed to catch up, and the beach came back. So that was 3 years. That's a very different system, high erosion, but managed retreat is great at maintaining natural resources, not as great for maintaining a road that's right behind it. So there are choices to be made. So there's a lot of sort of vegetation, dune, natural-based approaches that are, and they kind of go from small to big on this list. You can do sort of storm berms that help buffer that big storm. We can start using some of the driftwood in some of dune restoration to sort of to stabilize things a little more, guide pedestrians from trampling, the dune ramps. Vegetation can help stabilize. We could develop sort of a beneficial reuse if somebody's digging a basement and they have compatible sand. Instead of trucking it to the landfill, which it usually happens now, we could identify a place to put it so that it gets back to the beach. We can start to, harvest some sand from the beach during key times of the year to help buffer from erosion or add more sand up higher into the dunes. There's a potential for finding sand outside in larger volumes to nourish the entire beach. And all of these have different costs and trade-offs. We did an initial sand source. Everybody knows how amazing the sand is here. And we heard that very, very clearly in the survey. You know, you go around the corner in Carmel River State Beach is dirty sand, and Carmel-by-the-Sea has clean sand. Sorry, state parks. But that's the perception, and it is amazing. I mean, we went down there before the meeting today and was just like, yes, it's amazing. We looked, all of that sand's coming eroded off of the Monterey Peninsula and has traveled in and takes a long time. Granite doesn't erode very fast, meaning it doesn't make a lot of sand very fast. But that's the source. So we kind of looked from desktop what is out there. There's some potential deposits. Can we get them? I don't know. It's a marine sanctuary. Is there enough sand to make a difference? I don't know. That is a critical fork in the road for Carmel. Is there sand that is compatible and consistent with the beach? Color, size, feel, taste, all of it. And can we get it and put it on the beach? Two big questions, two big question marks. So that is one of the studies that we are really, needs more work. And as a result, if there is sand and we can put it there, then we have a whole host of adaptation options that are very much more nature-based. If we do not, then we have a different set of strategies. So it is a fork in the road that the community is going to have to investigate. There's a lot of engineered infrastructure, some of the most beautiful seawalls I've ever seen. They are still in pretty good shape. They need maintenance. And so these are strategies that stop or reduce the erosion. But they do require, and there's different sort of aspects to it. We can add, like at the bottom of this staircase, for example, there's a wave deflector. A lot of when the waves come up and pile up, it creates these currents that scour the back of the beach. If we disrupt those currents in different ways, it reduces the erosion and may maintain the beach longer. There's always secondary consequences of any adaptation strategy, costs, trade-offs. If you hold the line and sea level rises, you lose the beach unless you continue to nourish. There's an example from Imperial Beach with and without a beach nourishment. We looked at, by 3 feet, less than, only 40% of the beach width is projected to be still here in the summertime. So there are a couple other strategies, and those are very traditional engineering or nature-based approaches. These are some more innovative ones that we have also considered and asked the community and the Coastal Commission to, if these would be viable. Underlying a lot of the beach, especially in the southern reaches, are a bunch of sandstone sort of outcrops that are buried most of the year. When they're not buried, then they are also channels for waves to get in to attack the back shore. We could potentially add some enhancements, either, and these are really detailed engineering crayon shapes, as you can see, that have, fill some of these gaps and could disrupt that wave energy and velocity and potentially help deposit sand on the backside and retain it from getting sucked back offshore. The low-crested structure, the triangle version of the crayons, could also be something that, adds a little bit of wave tripping and reduces some of that velocity before it slams into the seawalls. I would imagine these would be buried under the sand most of the time. When it was exposed, they would really help reduce the impact hours on the back of the seawall. Nearshore reefs is another one that's starting to gain some interest in California. Oceanside is looking at a re-beach program that consists of some offshore reefs to help do this. So you wouldn't be the first one. This is a marine sanctuary. There's already reefs out here. They are not in a place that really dissipates a lot of the wave energy and help retain sand in the current configuration. So potentially we could look at a series of offshore reefs or augmenting some of the rock reefs out there to help break the wave energy up before it comes into shore And that would allow sand to not maybe go as far offshore in the wintertime and stay closer and have more come back in the summer. Again, that's there's a lot of maybes in that. All of these discussion ones that I mentioned here would all require a lot more investigation, modeling, engineering, design, thumb wrestling with different regulatory agencies. And so this is one of the discussion topics that we want to sort of also have. But before I go into, so before we get into sort of our recommendations, I want to pause, get a sip of water, and have some questions from you guys and have a discussion about, what you guys' preferences are and things like that. And I may call on some of the other wonderful staff we have here to help.
So you want to take some questions
Yeah,
now?
please, I'm just gonna grab.
Okay.
How do you want to do this?
Normally what I do is I just call on individuals in order. I
Okay.
find it works out better. So I'm just going to go around. Commissioner Ross, you want to start?
I guess my question is, from all of these, and you said you talked to the Coastal Commission, are they giving you the touchy-feely kind of push them this way, or do you think they would be more inclined to go the natural route and very less inclined to do all this engineering? What's your initial kind of thoughts on that?
I cannot speak for the Coastal Commission. However, having worked with them on a number of projects, whatever it does the best to maintain the natural resources, the access and protection of public infrastructure are sort of the big priorities. They're much more, so getting, and sometimes, a living shoreline project, one of them took 16 years to get permitted down in Ventura. It doesn't necessarily mean it's gonna be any easier, because a lot of that requires innovation. But in general, the Coastal Commission is much more ready to permit a more natural approach than another engineered structure. With that said, maintaining what you have, so you don't have to rebuild it, is also really important. And one of the things we're saying is get a monitoring and maintenance plan program certified through the Coastal Commission, so you can go out and fix the walls when they need it. You can replace the concrete in the grout and the footing, so it's not scouring. And so those structures will last a lot longer, and they are integrated with critical coastal access. So.
Okay.
No other questions?
No.
Okay, Commissioner Blazinski? Or I'm going to probably mess some of your names up, so I apologize ahead of
No
time.
worries. I have two questions. First, I love the idea of having a monitoring plan set up through this that gives the city more flexibility on not getting behind on deferred maintenance. That's a great, that in and of itself would be a near-term immediate benefit to the town. The two questions I have are, first, so there was a big difference on that very first slide between 0 to 3, 4 feet level sea rise in terms of implications for the beach, and how we might address them. So will you be making a recommendation as we develop a plan as to what sea level rise has the
Yes.
greatest probability, and
I
what,
could
like,
go
so
to the
should we be looking?
next section will answer a lot of those. So
Okay.
for each of those 3 planning areas, we go through what we should do now, 1 foot, 2 foot, and what we should be monitoring that says when we hit half of a beach, the beach width is narrows by half, we should have already started planning for the next thing. So we're gonna go through all of that in some detail, and it's in the report in a lot of detail, but we wrote it down because we don't have time to go through it all.
Okay, so but what is the overall sense of the timing? Like, in how many years would we be likely to lose 2 feet of beach?
Yeah, so the scientific projections around sea level rise are a range. And they kind of fall into a 20-year range. And so a foot could be between 2040 and 2060. And 2 feet could be 2060, 2080. The sort of the higher levels, we could see up to 7 feet by, 6.5, 7 feet by 2100. But it doesn't stop there. It's gonna keep going. So we need to understand that long-term, we've set in motion sea level rise is gonna be around for 10,000 years if we were to stop greenhouse gas emissions yesterday. So it's gonna keep rising. There's hundreds of feet of sea level rise stored in the ice caps and glaciers, and as warm water expands and comes steaming out of the teapot, that's all gonna rise. So the trend is going, when it happens, is where the uncertainty comes in. And so the way we are looking at it is not at 1 foot, we're gonna do this. We're looking at when the beach width or when the sand ramps have eroded back and exposed the sandstone, and now there's no beach access and we have a vertical cliff. You know, we want to do something before we get to the vertical cliff. So what you'll see are these triggers that we've identified that would be further clarified in the monitoring plan. So you led perfectly into that with your questions, so that cues us to take the next steps. And if we do this in a transparent way with the community, that monitoring can include the community. And so everybody's watching for this precious resource that we all love. And we all have agreed in advance what we're gonna do when we get to that point. What's the next study? What's the next plan? What direction are we gonna go?
Okay, and then my last question is on, that, you know, that the beach doesn't know what's city and what's county out there on the sand when you cross that. The beach doesn't know that, nature doesn't know that. So are you doing this same work for the county Beath North that we can't seem to get this project to ever focus on? Is there a Pebble Beach or county project on that portion of the beach, or is that just at this point left unattended?
We're not working directly with them. We have in our analysis considered that, you know, it's all a system. But for the most part, you know, the sand does move a little onto Pebble Beach. I don't think they're gonna be able to do a whole lot different than anything you guys do. So, but being a good neighbor, we should talk to them as we get these plans and preferences. You know, one of the policies that we always put in these LCP updates is coordinate with your regional partners and funders. Because it is, you know, it's gonna take a village. We have been talking to COD. They have some sea level rise plans, and they've given us some ideas on what could be done if we lose a pump station, how much it might cost. So there has been some of that. That will be ongoing forever.
But no, you're not doing any similar project on that part of the beach?
Not on that part, no.
Okay.
Lots of other counties.
Okay, Commissioner Burley, any questions you may have?
No, I have no questions right now.
Okay, and Commissioner Ruta?
Hi, 3 questions. The first one's got 16 parts, though.
Okay,
Just joking.
cool. I better get something to write down.
Question number 1, who's approving this plan? Is this something that our city council approves?
It has to be, and Anastasia or Esme, well, anybody on the team can correct me if I get this wrong, but the council, it'll first go to planning commission, then it will go to city council, and then it would go to coastal commission.
Okay.
And usually at that stage, there's some back and forth about,
Right.
and then it will come back, and then you negotiate and you find common ground or you don't.
Okay.
And then it would be certified. Once, you know, coastal commission says yes, then whatever they changed, the city either accepts or you go back and forth.
So at some point, when it gets to city council, there'll be recommendations and hopefully input from us in terms of what we think are the right options to choose, et cetera.
Yeah. So
Okay.
this will, what comes out of these pathways will then, you know, through these discussions, will then go into the policy development. And it's the policy development that will allow us to do certain things now while we're investigating what we're gonna do later. And then those would require subsequent permits or updates to the local coastal program again.
Okay. Second question is, I think it was SB 272 you said
Yes.
requires the update. Is there a minimal expectation that the coastal commission is looking for in terms of stuff that we're gonna do?
Yes, and there is a list with 16 parts.
Okay.
And this work is very much aligned with that.
Okay.
And that was one of the comments they gave us on some of the work. It's like, hey, if you add, another paragraph, then it's crystal clear that this also does that. The benefit of going through and getting over that 272, it's not an unfunded mandate. There is funds out there. But what happens once you sort of get over that hump, then you're eligible, then you're higher prioritized for funding from the state.
Okay, and that was my third question,
Yeah.
which is tell us about the hidden stock of money
Yeah.
that's available for us to do this work.
The Coastal Commission, Coastal Conservancy, Ocean Protection Council, Strategic Growth Council, there's been a lot of funding to really get California on a good path. And they're still continuing to fund this. This last one was funded, and, the Coastal Commission is very pleased with the direction. If we get good policy out of it and we need more work, more funding to do technical work, I'm pretty sure they would be happy to fund another round of stuff.
So in terms of us deciding to go search for sand, for example, we can go talk to somebody to say, how much money can we get from you to actually go do this experiment?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Commissioner Ritchie?
Thank you. Hi, David.
Hi.
First question is about sand. I know we've talked a lot about sand in the past and about the sandbar, which catches our sand and returns our sand. That there's a cycle to that, and we've looked at past cycles over the past 30, 60, 100 years, and the sand always comes back. I know we have more storms now and sea level rise. How is that going to affect, because we're talking now about getting sand, where we've naturally in the past been able to just rely on that sandbar. Because we're hit with these storms, there is erosion, then we're hit with another storm, we're never really getting a chance to fully replenish the sand as we did in the past. Is that the biggest reason? Is that one of the reasons? Is sea level rise another factor?
Sea
But
level rise.
what's causing the loss of sand that we won't be able?
I think there's always been a little bit, I think there's always been a little bit of leakiness to the sandbox in Carmel. And at time, and so it dwindles a little bit, and you can see that there, at some of the trees up near the volleyball courts, there's those, now the roots are up here, and they used to be underground. So there's physical evidence that we've been losing sand from the system. At some point, big storms move the sand farther offshore, and sometimes that takes longer to come back. And at some point, sometimes it, might take it off to the south and around to Carmel River. We don't know the full sediment sand balance. It's a lot more secure and stable than most of the other places in California. But that's that's the fork in the road. That we need to understand more about the sand volumes that would be needed, where it's going, looking at that near shore bar changes over time if we can. So there's more technical work in that aspect. But again, Carmel, because it's kind of more stable, there's a lot more chance just to add some sand and keep the beach and everything sort of much more as is.
Okay, and then two follow-up questions, if I may, to what two of the Forest and Beach Commissioners had asked. The first one was when we had asked you what the process is from here on out, and you mentioned Planning Commission, City Council. Does the Forest and Beach have anything to do with the approval? I know you've been speaking with us, so just.
Yeah, I don't know what
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the plan is to go to, the LCP will go to the Planning Commission.
Okay.
The process, that is the process. So
Okay.
technically, no.
Okay.
I think we decided to have a joint meeting because the staff, the consulting staff only has a set number of meetings that they are presenting to.
Okay.
And so we thought it was a good idea to do a joint one so that we're not, doing to both
Okay.
commissions. But
Okay.
yeah, the ideally, that's where this study goes, is to the Planning Commission Council.
Okay, thank you, thanks, Mary. And then just one last question. When Commissioner Brzezowski had asked about if any other neighboring cities or counties are also getting involved in this, we're working off of a grant from the Coastal Commission.
Yes.
No one else on this immediate coast
So.
further north has this
Ci-
sort of a grant that they're working off of with you, or?
City of Monterey has one, I'm not working on this phase in the city of Monterey, but, yeah, we're working with EMC in the city of Marina. There's work going on, we're working on the county of Santa Cruz. There's a lot of the jurisdictions up and down the state are doing similar work tailored to each, sort of jurisdiction's unique characteristics.
So if it's not you then who's working on this, are you working in partnership to some extent with these other entities?
Yeah, we're taking lessons learned and, examples of good hazard policies that have been approved. We're kind of saying, how does that fit maybe here in Carmel, or does it? And trying to learn from, learn from the lessons.
'Cause I know that that's
Yeah.
an important thing, because
Yeah.
something that we do could have an adverse effect on the coastline
Right.
down the way, but if we build, a revetment or anything, it could push
Yeah.
and cause erosion. So there has to be some sort of, I would imagine, group effort to some extent. I would assume that the Coastal Commission is the body that would make sure that the parties are working in unison, but
Yeah, there are also regional climate collaborative. There's a Central Coast Climate Collaborative that's talking amongst the jurisdictions about not just this, but wildfire and, water quality, a whole host of climate things. Fortunately, 90% of Carmel's coastal issues are in Carmel's jurisdiction. So you guys have it easier than, say, the Santa Barbara Littoral Cell, which has like 6 cities and 2 counties, and that's a fun one.
okay. All right. Thank you, David.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Albarn, you want to start?
Yes, thank you, Chair. 2 questions. First is really more of a comment. If indeed there's a choice between us losing the Carmel Beach and us matching Carmel's perfect sand, I would be leaning towards saving the beach rather than matching the sand. So that's more of a comment. Question, these nearshore reefs, and it's convenient that this is up to look at. Carmel is a destination for surfers. Would these nearshore reefs affect our surfing population?
They could. We're working on an artificial surf reef design in Australia and to try and enhance surf. There are opportunities for multi-objective reefs like this to have surf amenities, habitat enhancements, erosion protection, sediment retention. So it really gets into a lot of what are the priorities. As a surfer, I don't want to ever be the one who screwed up the waves. I'd love to try and make them better, but that's definitely a consideration. And that would be something that, we're working on some surf quality impact assessments in Malibu right now that look at impacts of projects and how it may affect, a world-class break. So, yeah. And that question on your comment is that fork in the road that I keep talking about. It's, in the surveys, in the public workshops, everyone's like, this sand or nothing, this is the best sand. That's this generation. The generation that can't go to the beach most of the year might say, I don't care, just give me some sand. So again, we're not planning and writing policy for the next 100 years, but we're looking out that far to make sure we don't take actions that are gonna, do harm and make it more expensive and harder to keep a beach long-term. That's gonna be our kids' or grandkids' problem and discussion in the community. But it is, I agree with you. I want a beach over a color of a beach, but we heard loud and clear, it's this beach, this color right now. So.
Okay, Commissioner Allen, your comment. or
I don't
question.
have any questions at this time, thank you.
Okay, and Commissioner Locke?
I don't have any questions either. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Carapagova is moving in quick.
That's quick, yeah, absolutely. So, Commissioner Burling and I live in the south part of the town, so we are much more interested. Also Commissioner Ross, okay, excellent. 3 of us live in South Carmel. So we are much more interested in what happens down in the south. That would be Carmel River.
Bias noted.
Yeah. So we have some critical infrastructure in that area. We have the water treatment plant, and we have an elementary school, right? So I hope that you would cover that area as well, because these are services and infrastructure that is very critical to us. And also, we are making decisions about adding additional infrastructure in the area, in the city and around the city, like wireless towers and all that. We need to understand if there are any no-go areas, like areas where we shouldn't be investing in terms of infrastructure long-term. I understand that this is a long-term kind of thinking, but there are also tsunamis, and tsunamis happen quickly and they can flood much faster, right? So in the case of a tsunami, should we expect, for example, that the water treatment plant would be flooded? What are the consequences? Is the evacuation plan for the school? What are the consequences? So these are the kind of the more practical questions I have around that.
Yeah, and there's, none of the infrastructure, I got a quick nod from Matt, that none of that infrastructure or facilities are in the hazard zones that we've identified.
They're not in the study area that we.
Oh, they're not in the study area. So that would fall Monterey County and part of the wastewater treatment, water, Cal-Am sort of water supply. And they are doing separate studies that hopefully are considering some of that. That is not necessary. So there's other processes going on. And the question about regional coordination is really important. And big infrastructure like that, really, that's one of the things that drove, SB 272 to be passed, was that we need to think far enough ahead that we're not creating bottlenecks for critical infrastructure we're gonna depend on. We don't wanna build something that's going to become an island and everybody else is drowned, and we've attracted people to it. So there is that consideration statewide, but that's not part of this project.
Yeah, go ahead, Commissioner Locke.
I did think of something. Are you aware of any other national marine sanctuaries that are undertaking a similar process right now in California?
Yeah, Gulf of the Farallones is kind of leading the way.
And are we communicating with them?
I can't speak to, the city's involvement with some of the other ones. I mean, I certainly have colleagues and friends. There's, the Gulf of the Farallones has done a lot around regional sediment management and getting regulatory agencies to sort of lay out a path for looking at beach nourishment and how would it get permitted. All of those kinds of questions. There has been a rewriting of some of the sanctuary regulations in, I think it was 2002 or 3, recently enough since the study started, that allows beneficial reuse to be a part of, for reducing erosion, to be a part of some of the, within the sanctuaries. That used to be no. So they've been using that at Pillar Point Harbor. That's filled with sand, and they took the sand out and put it on the beach that was eroding right next door. But that took 18 years in rewriting sanctuary rules. But that part's done now. So there's opportunities, but it hasn't been thoroughly vetted, and how much is too much, taking it from somewhere. There's a lot of questions still.
Okay, I had a question, basically just, what we have is that the coastal property in California is the most desirable and the most expensive, and it has attracted a lot of development. And so there's going to be a huge amount of pressure to protect that property. And so it seems to me that sand replenishment and berms are kind of near-term solutions. So really the emphasis is going to be put on types of hardening or offshore reefs. And I guess what I'm curious about, it doesn't sound like there's been, are there any operating artificial offshore reefs along the coast that you know of? I mean, you mentioned,
not for the
you mentioned something in Southern Cal, was it?
So there's no artificial reefs that have been developed for erosion protection and adaptation. There are some artificial, fish habitat restoration reefs. Fish and Wildlife, California Department of Fish and Wildlife is working on an artificial reef program update right now.
But that's
there-
habitat oriented, I mean, that's
Yeah,
for,
focus, but
for
there's
flora
been
and fauna,
nothing, there's been nothing. The Re-Beach program in Oceanside is sort of the biggest initiative active in the state right now. But there are reef projects around the globe that have been, had various levels of effectiveness. It's hard to build in the surf zone and not screw things up.
so there's been governmental obstacles,
There's
or
engineering
just
obstacles,
technical
government obstacles, funding obstacles, logistical and construction obstacles. It's difficult to build in the surf zone.
Okay, and then my second question was just, can you speak a little bit more to the effects of hardening just in one area? You showed an example of the old Stillwell Hall, what happened there. I remember that building was there, and I was just wondering what are the known erosion consequences of revetments? I've seen
Yeah.
in Santa Cruz, they're reinforcing and spraying concrete onto the bluffs,
Yeah.
particularly in the Pleasure Point Opal Cliffs area. They've done that.
So-
I'm just wondering what kind of historical erosion information have we been able to collect or see from those types where they've done those types of applications?
Yeah, so this isn't, this figure here sort of captures what happens over time. It's a phenomenon known as coastal squeeze. There's sort of two impacts of engineering structures that harden the backshore and stop or reduce erosion. The first is placement loss, or the footprint of the structure. If you have a vertical wall, it's, maybe takes up 10 feet of beach. If you have a revetment, which is the rock pile types, that's usually a 2-to-1 slope. So if you go up 40 feet, you're out 80 feet. Some of the beaches in Santa Cruz are 60 feet, and so you have no more beach. And that's very common along West Cliff. So that is the placement of the structure takes up a footprint. That's one impact. The other one is called passive erosion or squeeze, where, beach has been maintained for eons by eroding and kind of moving up and in as sea levels rise. And then when it goes down, you get more wind building sand dunes because it's got more area to blow over the sand. When this sea level goes and this doesn't, you just drown the beach. And so over time, you'll lose the beach unless you nourish it and keep it out. Once it gets close to where it interacts with the wall, there's more active effects that sometimes prohibit the sand from coming back because it's always turbulent in the back of the beach. So those are the three biggest ones. There's engineering courses for a week if you want to take and get into the weeds, but generally those are, in Santa Cruz, and that was part of the reason we did the economics. The value of the beach in Carmel is substantial. The value of surfing in Santa Cruz was almost 200 million a year. So these are not inconsequential economic values, and the goal here is to try and strike the right balance. The access that's used along Scenic Drive has a lot of value, So what's the community's priorities today, and what's it gonna be tomorrow? And those are things that will unfold over time. But, we have considered sort of the full suite of options. And that's what I was gonna go into next.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah, go ahead. One more.
I just remembered something. As far as I remember, back in 1982, there was a big storm that hit Carmel, and that's when Scenic became a one-way street. Before that, it was two-way street, right? What happened then? What was the reason for that? Have you
That
investigated that?
was
Bill?
the 1982-83 El Nino, January 27th. It's one of the highest at almost every tide gauge in California. That was the highest recorded water level. Storms came from a more southerly direction than normal, kind of like the 2023 storm was really south shifted, and it got into places and it occurred at high tide, so it's high tide, big waves, bad direction, or good direction depending upon your perspective. That's the conditions.
So
And-
basically the roads crumbled, or the sand under the road was washed away, or what happened?
Much of the armoring came in after that event in California, honestly. And so there was cliff erosion, the waves got up into the softer bluff material and probably undermined the road. There's study, yeah, Matt.
From what I heard, like there were storms that came in December that scoured a lot of the beach already. So then when the big storm came in January, there was very little protected beach in front of it. So it really hit that backshore really hard and created a ton of erosion. We saw like 20, 30 feet of like bluff material lost in a lot of places.
Yeah. So
So-
that's some of the
yeah.
anecdote is, I remember one of the Johnson reports was, talked about in places there was 20 to 40 feet of cliff retreat. And that's in the softer bluff material, not the sandstone. But that's what everything's built on the top, so.
So is there a scenario in which we have a storm like that and then we lose the other part of
So
scenic?
that's sort of what I was talking about, where right now, when the waves hit the seawall, it goes vertical and maybe sprays in because of the wind. But over time, that wave run-up dynamics will have more horizontal momentum and velocity and start to create bigger erosion chunks and failures.
And when we approve houses with basements on scenic, are we working against nature? Are we undermining the stability of the cliff?
That is a
Making it weaker?
geotech question about the effect on the cliff stability. We're definitely screwing with nature, but that's a different question. It's a geotech question and would have to be sort of assessed based on the underlying geology.
Okay, I think it's good if we allow the presenter to kind of move on. Thank you.
Okay. So, all of that work that we talked about, very high level, now we're gonna go into your neighborhood and everybody's sort of into those three planning areas we talked about. And this has had feedback from Forest and Beach Commission already, included the community responses to the surveys and economics, and then sort of our experience. So an adaptation pathway is sort of a flexible, step-by-step approach to move through time that guides taking different actions based on observed changes. And those changes can be monitored and become triggers. And so a trigger is basically something that says, hey, we've been doing this one thing, say, keeping the seawalls in one place, and now we're starting to see that waves come up and over and start to erode more, okay? And we saw it happen once 5 years ago. Now it's happening every year. We need to start planning so it doesn't happen every high tide. And so it takes away that uncertainty of, do we do it at 1 foot or 2 foot of sea level rise? Well, I don't know when that's gonna happen. We need to know when it starts happening more frequently. We need to get something, starting that planning process, so we have time to plan, argue, implement, debate, fund, finance, design, construct, before we hit the worst case scenarios and emergencies happen. So it's kind of going, what do we wanna do? How long is it gonna take to get planned? And we start planning backwards. And then we go, okay, well, it's gonna take 20 years to do that. So we need something that's gonna to tell us, hey, you got 20 years left in the hourglass before we need that. And that's how this pathway is developed. And it ties into the monitoring so we know what to look for in advance before we, have nowhere to put anything, because land is eroded. So within the report, there are a series of these big, elaborate visuals. And in this green box are the triggers. And these triggers are measurable, observable things that signal when we're gonna start planning the next action or strategy. Some of these strategies, hey, we're doing a sacrificial, winter berm. Okay, that one got eroded. Okay, here's a storm, we got 24 hours. That's all we need to do that. We're gonna plan for relocating the wastewater main under scenic. That's gonna take a little bit longer, so we need to know those times. And, but they should be, pretty observable, measurable, because then we can get the community involved in monitoring. It can be integrated into public works maintenance activities. Okay, you had to go clean up the sand at the Del Mar parking lot. How many wheelbarrows did you have? How many cubic yards did you have to, move? So we can start seeing those changes over time. So we need, sort of, what are we monitoring? Where do we store it so we can see over time how it's changing? And the way we look at these, and you'll see a bunch of these figures, so I'm gonna try and orient everybody. You see on the top left, slanted on the side, there's a dark green, a light green, a yellow, and a red. Those are the current situation. What should we be doing right now? Near term is, what do we do in the next 10, 15 years? Or, 0 to 15 years maybe. Midterm is sort of, 15 to 30 and after 30, okay? The reason there's no time is because we don't know what a half a foot, 1 foot, 2 foot, 4 foot of sea level rise is actually going to occur. We're monitoring that, but we don't know for sure. So then we have in the green boxes the triggers, and some of the examples of triggers. Let me just see what I have the next slide real quick. Okay, so some of the examples here are, what's the condition of the coastal armoring? Has the revetment kind of failed and gone all over the beach? Or is it oversteepened and unsafe for kids to climb on? How often is waves overtopping the seawalls now? How wide is the beach? How often is the bedrock in the south part of the city exposed? Is it gone by early March or does it stay till May? Those are some of the things that we can easily observe and monitor and see how it changes over time. What's the depth of sand on the sand ramp before you start stubbing your toe on the sandstone underneath it? So we have a series of those over time, and you'll notice that they're redundant as we go down because we want to be monitoring the same things so we can see the long-term changes. So the depth of the sand on the sand ramp is one we were talking about before the meeting. What are how frequently do we have to repair 8th Avenue emergency access? Once a decade, okay. Once a year, maybe we want to do something else. So some of those are kind of the monitoring and triggers, and these are examples that have some detail, but it's not the final ones. We need to sort of develop. And so if you go outside the box to the right, well, the top is sort of what those triggers are. Right now we're in present, and I use sea level rise elevations on the top. That could be time, that could be beach width. That could be how much money did the city pay to clean up the parking lot or replace. Any one of those triggers could be substituted on that horizontal axis on the pathway visualization, okay? Then underneath those red lines that are horizontal are a series of plans and studies that kind of need to be done in that time period to inform the next steps and help determine the priority selection, best alternative, community preferences. Those red lines horizontal, there's sort of the dashed part. That's the planning, permitting, designing, arguing, visioning, construction. And then the red line that extends is how long it's effective. Or our projection for how long it's effective. Because if you maintain something, it works a lot better than if you don't. And then that square at the end is sort of when it sort of we estimate it stops being effective altogether. And we want to have already gotten to the next path before we move on. Any questions on that? Okay. So to look at we're going to start in the north and work south. Okay. The primary hazards in the north are really around the sand ramp deflation. A lot of that's just from over-loving our beaches and walking down and dragging the sand on our feet back into our car, into the showers at home. So there's some of that can be mitigated in many different ways. And so helping reduce dune erosion, there is some stormwater related scour, especially near that 4th Avenue outfall. And there's increasing wave exposure as sea levels come up. The adaptation priorities that we've identified are really maintaining the beach access and dune stability through some sand management, and that could take any number of forms. Monitoring, so we know when we need to add sand to the top or over the sand ramps. Really looking at maybe some pedestrian guides so that we're not trampling everywhere, but we have some vegetation that helps to stabilize some of the sand. And provide some guides to visual cues or whatever to sort of reduce some of that. And eventually, thinking about infrastructure relocation or retrofits. And I think it's the 4th Avenue. Yeah, so here's some of the pieces. This is the current sort of recommendations. Right now, the city's looking at this 4th Avenue storm drain and what to do with it. And I want to give a great example of why adaptation pathways is important. One of it is like, it's not functioning, it's ugly, let's do something different. Okay, well, it is providing some service of retaining some of the sand and habitat on the dunes up above. So if we repair or replace, instead of just doing it and going, all done, Band-Aid's fixed, same, what if we engineer it so that when those sand dunes start to disappear and we're looking now at a sandstone cliff, we can easily add in a vertical staircase. So it's engineered into the design today and we take the step later. Or if we're rebuilding a seawall now, make sure it's got the stability that we can add another 5 feet on top later. Building in that ahead of time instead of here's the lowest cost estimate today, to, with a metal pipe that's gonna rest into a pile of rocks on the beach that people are gonna stumble on. Okay, so there's an upfront investment that could save a lot of money later. But some of the key studies that need to be done, so we have some triggers there that are recommended. How, often does the bedrock get exposed? How far is the first root on the tree from the bottom of the sand, from the sand levels? Those are some very simple ones. But then there's sort of some management plans, integrating some nature-based, maybe some driftwood at the base of the sand dunes to kind of help reduce some of the velocity and absorb some of the wave energy before it scarps it. We've had some projects in Santa Cruz and around the country that have been successful at helping some of that. And then knowing what's there. So the green arrows are sort of some of the key vulnerable aspects. So the beach viewing platform is getting closer and closer. One of the threats is also the vegetation growing in front of it too, but that's a different issue. Then as we go into the near term, again, starting to look for other sources of sand. The next basement that gets built on Scenic Drive, let's take that sand, test it, and then if it's compatible and clean, let's put it, where it's gonna erode down onto the beach instead of end up in the landfill. Let's start to reconnect some of those, looking at trapping sand, harvesting sand when those wind events come and are blowing sand into the volleyball courts. Let's capture that with some vegetation or, really sort of let's align the vegetation so it maximizes that upward transport that we don't have to pay for. So there's some things like that. And then really starting to look at that fork in the road of, are we gonna find another source of sand to augment and maintain the beaches, or not? And Matt, I'm going fast, so if there's things, please. This is the fork in the road here. And in the midterm right now, in all of these different area pathways, we have sort of A, B, or C, at least A and B. One is, and this one is the only one that has retreat, because there's really not a lot in that area that is really at risk. It's a lot of dune habitat and things like that are natural resources. And so retreat in this area is probably the most feasible and easiest than anywhere else in the city.
Except for you lose, that's the main public access point to the beach.
Yes. If we protect it, then we lose the access too unless we build stairs. So depending upon what we do, we could squeeze out the access too. So we only highlight that it is an option that is much more feasible here than moving Scenic Road and the beautiful homes or the sewer pump station right now. This is the place that it could happen. And again, this is a community discussion. This is midterm, so we're talking, 2050 after, okay? But the fork of the road is beach nourishment. If we nourish the beach or find a source of sand where we can keep the sand at the top of the ramps, and then as it tramples and erodes, it's transported to the beach and fills the leaky sand bucket on the beach, then that might be enough. Maintain the seawalls and structures that we have and bring in sand. That might solve it for a long time. If no, then we have to start looking at these engineering ones and solutions. And it might be nearshore reefs. It might be additional armoring. It might be vertical seawalls with access way stairs. And that's where some of these other more engineering pieces would have to be investigated. Not saying let's go design a network of artificial surf reefs right now. It'd be fun to do for me, but that is not where I would say is money well spent. Let's see if we can find sand and if we can get permission to put it on the beach is sort of the highest priority. And so, and then long term depends on the fork in the road and the community's willingness to accept more, brown ugly sand or think outside the box and put in reefs or something like that. Or move.
So to be forthright,
Uh-huh.
how much money do you need to go prove how much money it's gonna cost to get the sand? And how long does that take?
So that is one of the things, and we were talking to the city, that's a really high priority, and hopefully we can help scope that to go look for funding to really do that investigation. We have lots of tools. There's a good report that these guys put together on sort of what we know about what's out there right now. And so we have some ideas of where to go look here, but then there's the rest of the world to look too. So that is a great question. I don't have a precise answer, but we will hopefully get you a better answer. So, if that can become an action that maybe the city takes in the near term. It's certainly one of the highest priority questions and would inform the policy development and a lot of other things. So, great question. So that's sort of the north, okay? I'm gonna go, I think the next one is, yes, central. Okay, so this area is primarily sort of the erosion had scoured the 8th Avenue access. There's dune retreat on one of the dune ramps, the Del Mar dune ramp. And then there's the wastewater pump station right next to the 8th Ave access. So this one we're really focused, again, similarly on maintaining the emergency access and dunes in the near term, and then evaluating nourishment and sort of looking at infrastructure relocation potentially if we can't nourish, or integrating armoring into protections. So an example here, again, we have very similar sand management options, dune management, guiding access to reduce trampling, similar measures in the dune ramp area. One of the main triggers is looking at how much maintenance costs are around the 8th access repair that that's kind of ongoing right now, to see how long that's gonna last. And one of the opportunities here is, and that includes understanding where the sandstone is that's underneath the sand ramp, so we know how much erosion before we stop being able to use the sand ramps as access is a major trigger and monitoring need. And this is sort of one of the things that could be considered if the nourishment isn't there. We could look at realigning this 8th Avenue access and potentially integrating some coastal protection and a new seawall around that pump station so that could remain. and still provide more of a ADA driving access ramp. And we have a couple configurations. Potential for, in that case, we could potentially remove some of the revetment that's buried in the sand that would be exposed and, buy back some of the beach because we'd be removing that placement loss. And then looking at some dunes or some other kind of creative ways to, keep the areas that do have more width and aren't critically eroding, blend that into the landscape. So that's another sort of strategy that could be looked at.
Can I ask a question now, because it's kind of pertinent to this?
Sure.
We talk in your report about planting native species and things like that, that's helping. This is full of ice plant. And so my question is kind of, is ice plant our friend? Or should that also be something we're kind of working on, is to get out this invasive species? Is there a better native plant selection that would help? Or is ice plant, from a adaptation point of view, fine?
I'm not a biologist, so take this with a grain of salt. I think ice plant's really bad, except for stopping cigarettes from starting fires on freeways. It doesn't really provide habitat and the root system. It's really heavy, so when it's dangling over, it almost pulls, especially when it's rained. It gets even heavier and it pulls part of the cliffs or dunes down. Native vegetation has much better roots. Actually, the old dune management plan, the existing dune management plan, has a great planning palette. And that's part of what implementing some of those in the access of those dune ramps I would kind of use what the city's been investing in and sort of get it, sort of built or in. And a lot of that, again, very active citizenry that could be engaged to help do that. We've had great success at Surfers Point in Ventura, where citizen planting, citizen weeding has made this beautiful dune system. So there's a lot of ways to do these things, and it doesn't have to be huge, high costs. It can be community building, So native plants are better for poison oaks. Really good at holding, really good at holding hill slopes together. Yeah. Hey, walk off at your own risk. So, and then again, then there's the fork in the road. Nourish, no nourish. And, we sort of have some ideas of what could be done, with that. And then long term, it's how long do you want to fight the ocean? We're never going to win that battle, but that's not a decision we have to make today. But we have to make sure that we don't start fighting it earlier than we need to.
What is the square footage of the beach? Do you know how big it is?
Tell me what day.
Like today?
Yeah, that is, we have lots and lots. We have a whole sort of study on the beach dynamics. And so I couldn't give you, off the top of my head. It wouldn't take too much. I think the question that we need to answer is, what's the volume of sand today? And what's the volume of sand maybe in the past, or the volume?
Yeah, that's what I want to figure out, is like, if it's like, I don't know, 10,000 square feet, it's not 10,000 square feet, like 10 million square feet. If we want to raise it 1 foot, we need 10 million, cubic feet of sand.
Yeah.
What is the most efficient way to bring 10 million cubic feet of sand to Carmel?
That is exactly.
Not through Highway 1. You have to put them on a ship and bring them in the bay, right? So this is very practical kind of.
Yes, you are very practical.
Right.
That's exactly what this fork in the road, sand source, sand beach nourishment investigation feasibility study would answer all those questions. And Matt told me, Dave, this is not in our scope. I want to do that right now. So we definitely want to continue to work to answer these questions, because that's what ultimately is going to help you guys choose a course that's going to be the most sustainable long term.
Okay.
Great questions. Okay, and then move. When you guys move, somebody's going to have to make some really hard decisions and have some hard conversations, but the ocean is going to win. We've all built sandcastles. And moving down to the south, right now the beaches get narrower in the winter in particular. So monitoring winter beach widths, monitoring the exposure of the sandstone underneath, mapping the sandstone underneath so we know where it is and how much and how frequently. That's kind of the monitoring pieces. But we do get a lot more frequent wave run-up reaching the back of the seawalls, overtopping, gets pretty high. You have some really nasty currents during storm events right there that we could try and disrupt. So maintaining access, well, let's get the access stairs repaired and let's get, some plans in place so that we can do it quickly next time they get damaged. And then trying to protect the critical infrastructure, scenic road, all that in the near term, evaluating nourishment, and then from there determining whether we need to upgrade coastal armoring, look at realignment or retreat, or elevating the seawalls more. Those are sort of the engineering. And so I can walk through those pretty quickly. This is sort of my very highly detailed engineering drawings of some of these augmentations that we could do. This staircase here could be turned into one of the rock walls that have a more armoring protection, wave deflectors to break up some of the currents. The beach nourishment question, and then looking at some of these protections of elevating the crest of the structures, or wave tripping devices or nearshore reefs, and those sort of farther off alternatives to be determined after we decide which fork we're going to go down. So, should we pause for questions? Are there any quick questions? Because I think this next step's going to go pretty quick.
Before we get questions from the commissioners, last time I didn't allow the public any questions. Is there anybody in the public that has any questions for the presenter? Okay, I just wanted to make sure that we got the public in on this discussion. So just go ahead. Anybody want any questions? Just jump in. I'm not going to call you individually.
Okay. There's a few more, and then there's backups if we need to, but let's get through this and then we can really have a discussion with everyone. So triggers we've talked about. A lot of the triggers kind of fall in these categories. Beach widths. If we want to have a summer beach width and we see the winter beach width disappear, then there's not going to be a very wide summer beach. So we need to monitor winter beaches too. Erosion distances, obviously, how close is the road to the bluff edge? The depth of sand in places on the dune rams, vegetation cover, if we're doing a big restoration to try and control or guide access, and all of a sudden it all disappears. We want to make sure we're maintaining that. Wave exposure, overtopping frequency, and public access and infrastructure performance. If the closed days of access stairs, something like that. And then monitoring, and we've just had a nice conversation with city staff on some monitoring. Surfline has a immense camera network. They're now using that to do science. So we can look at, we're working with them on the North Shore of Oahu, looking at beach monitoring to sort of help develop a beach and dune management plan. They can count the number of people on the beach. They can't, say when commissioner's out surfing, we can't do facial recognition with it, but we can count people in the water, people on the beach, and that feeds into that economic analysis and growth that we kind of already presented previously. And then looking at wave quality, if we're going to look at, nearshore reefs, it can help with some of that. So that's a great automated tool. There's CoSnap is another technique where there's just a stand. Anybody in the public can come in, snap a photo, hit the QR code, the photo gets uploaded, algorithm says shoreline's here. And so we can start to monitor that over time, and everybody who goes to the beach who wants to participate can. There's also things we can do with, how the city assigns public works, tasks, maintenance tasks. Okay, you had to go clean up the parking lot, how much sand, stuff like that that can be just embedded into the daily workflows that will help start to count and track. And so, these are sort of, so that's something that is also, I think, a really important near-term action. Immediately, we should probably, in the North Beach, really look at reducing the sand ramp deflation and guiding beach access. Continue with to think about the 4th Avenue outfall and seawall and options, but not just fix it now, but what can it perform later for us and how will it still be there and benefiting. Start monitoring. Then sort of, again, regrade some of the emergency access and accesses, particularly the seawalls and revetments, developing a monitoring and maintenance program so that can get permitted by the, certified by the Coastal Commission, permitted, integrated into the LCP, and then the city controls the monitoring and maintenance and, themselves in a much more transparent and approved fashion. And then stairway enhancements, looking maybe at adding some wave energy deflectors or altering those along the back of the seawalls. And then sort of restoring some of the bluff vegetation. I understand there were some small failures from this last storm. Let's get some not ice plant vegetation in there, poison oak maybe, and, start to, take care of what we have before it disappears. And then studies, beach nourishment feasibility. I've said that plenty. I think everybody's going, we get it. But can't underpin that. Let's get, and these second ones, really, those are sort of after. But, developing that monitoring plan and the sediment beach nourishment plan, and then understanding sort of maybe evolving the dune management plan, which is largely around vegetation types and species to use into some designs on how we want to guide and steer the use of the dune ramps. Yeah, I'm curious if the rip currents stay in the same place or not. I have lots of other science nerdy questions too, but these are sort of some of the plans I've mentioned. Really, there's also the infrastructure, so working with COD, working with Pebble Beach, working with CalAm, making sure that their upgrades, improvements, and plans into the future include and coexist with the city's plan, and then monitoring some of these other aspects. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dave. That was great. Give you a break. Anastasia, I'm back just to close it out. So these are just some of the potential policy actions that could be considered for the local coastal program. I think that previous slide with the recommended studies could also be in the local coastal program. That might help the city be positioned for grants to help fund them as well. But like Dave was saying, the beach is sort of divided into the north, central, and south because there's very differing issues. So we would, I think, be looking at, framing it that way. But again, we'd like to hear what your thoughts on that. We'll also talk to Coastal Commission. And I think it's wide open right now because all these cities are doing their own studies. So it's up to this city what they want to do, how they want to frame the policies. But some examples are, you can encourage proactive adaptation through policy incentives and streamline permitting. Like if someone, I don't know, if the city has some particular idea of what they would like to see, if someone comes in on private property, for example, and if they do ABC, then they don't have to go to a public hearing. Things like that to incentivize the direction that the city would like to see the development take. Establish in lieu fees or dedicate funding streams for beach access, dunes, and sand management. So those are essentially creating separate funds within the city budget that would just fund this dedicated work. So it wouldn't get mixed up in other funding sources. There'd be dedicated funds. Adopting a coastal hazard overlay zone. So establishing just sort of an area along the coastline that is most at risk based on sea level rise and hazard mapping, and there could be additional requirements if there's development in that area. Develop coastal hazard real estate disclosure requirements. If, a transaction for private property happens and there needs to be a disclosure of, there is a sea level rise study, it's expected, but you may have expectations of, erosion on your property, for your information. Because it does affect insurance, it does affect whether or not you can get permits, there's a lot of things it affects. Continue just the existing armoring policies under the Coastal Act. And like Dave was saying, we are watching the Coastal Commission, and they are emphasizing access and also critical infrastructure. Those are the two main priorities. And obviously the critical infrastructure is very costly, like the COD or wastewater district, all of the pipes that go along Scenic Drive, that's costly to move. So it seems like the Coastal Commission is recognizing that and saying, okay, let's protect it for now till we get retreat in place. Link permit renewals and redevelopment approvals to updated hazard assessments and triggers. So for example, if someone again on private property comes in, they want to, demolish something and build something a lot larger on an area, say in this coastal hazard overlay zone, it may not be possible. And again, that's a policy decision for the city, the planning commission to recommend, or the council to recommend. And then update the local coastal program to formally integrate some of these triggers and monitoring that Dave was saying, to ultimately, I think, have managed retreat policies sometime in the future, and building codes to reflect future coastal hazards and resilience. And building codes are updated, I think, every 3 years. It's on a cycle, and right now, a lot of the emphasis is on fire and hardening, but it could be in the future, some of these along the coastal edges to be updated to reflect some of the coastal hazards. And then some of you did ask earlier in the presentation, like what are the next steps and what's the sort of regulatory path for these changes. So right now we want to hear what you have to say about policy development, and we can draft some policies based on what we hear, based on what's in the adaptation report, and then bring those back for draft policies for input and consideration. And then once we have some draft policies ready, the legislative process for a local coastal program amendment is the Planning Commission. A recommendation needs to be made by the Planning Commission. Then it goes to council, and these are tentative dates. So Planning Commission, summer, fall of this year. And Planning Commission would make a recommendation to City Council, fall or winter 2026. Council would adopt the plan, and then it would get submitted to the Coastal Commission. And the Coastal Commission, I don't think I've seen one plan where they haven't made some edits. So it's likely they would make some edits and adopt it based on those edits. And then like Dave was saying, because it wasn't exactly what the city adopted, it would get sent back to the City Council for adoption or for back and forth discussion again. So that's sort of the pathway forward. And then in the meantime too, what Dave was also saying is identifying there are many states and federal coastal resilience grants at this time to help fund some of these studies and monitoring. And then exploring more financing mechanisms for this particular city, like different funding sources, and put them in funds for near-term adaptation, monitoring, and maintenance actions. And I think with that, that concludes our presentation for today. Like Dave was saying, there's lots of other slides for particular questions if those come up, but I'm interested in hearing what your thoughts are, and I do understand there's a lot of information, but hopefully we've been parsing it out over the last couple of years that can have a good conversation. So thank you.
Are there any questions for
I got at least
Go ahead.
So from a timing perspective, I know, and I wish our Director of Public Works was here, we're in the design phase or the end of the design phase for the beach stairs. Mm-hmm. And it'd be great to understand if that's gonna meet the requirements that was being talked about in this plan. It'd be a shame if we went through this design and it didn't meet it and then we had to go rebuild them. So that's kind of the first, I don't know if it's a question or a statement, Mary, it sounds like you want to comment on it?
So Ken, I understand, is online as well, and so if there's something that I can't answer, I think
Yeah, yeah.
he's there. And we also have our project manager on the staircase, Shari, she's here as well, that can answer anything. The stairs that we are in the process of building are just a complete replace of the existing stairs, so it's not any changes. I believe it's going under an emergency permit, or that's what we've been discussing. And so it's just replacing the parts of the stairs and the foundation of it.
So unfortunately, we may have to do something else if it turns out that we want to improve.
Have a longer term.
Longer term.
Yeah, longer term would require more permitting and
Okay.
more design.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, and again, I think the only other question I had was, if one of the priorities, and it sounds like it was about finding out about the sand, I'd love to know the cost. The sooner the better, because I was looking at these times, this is like 1.5 years out to get through the whole process, and it'd be great if we had, some estimates of how to do some of this stuff sooner rather than later. And great information, thank you.
Do you have a question, Commissioner Ross?
Yeah, it's kind of a question and a comment. So there's a lot of monitoring that's as part of this plan. And I guess my question is for us, who's going to do that? And who's going to coordinate it within the city? Because it's nice to talk about groups doing it and stuff like that, but I know I'm not qualified to tell you what the width of the beach is, and so sand depth. So who does the monitoring, and who in the city kind of puts this all together to say, here's when we hit a tripwire? Because right now, I don't know we have the infrastructure with people to do that.
Yeah, we've just met about that before, and I think that'll probably be we just got a sort of on-call contract with the city, so that'll probably be one of our first task orders, especially if you guys all nod and say, yes, please. So try and help to do that so it becomes something that's more seamlessly implemented. There'll probably be discussion of cameras on the beach and things like that. It's been had all over the world where there's a surf camera. We can give presentations, but we'll put together some thoughts on what some of the key needs are and how we can implement them at sort of quickly at somewhat of a low cost. Because, there's some consultants who'll say, yeah, I'll do that for $250,000 every year. I'll walk the beach. And there's lots of ways to do that automated, bringing the community in. And so we'll try and find the right path there and lay out some steps. And there might be some bigger investments when all the sand scoured, we want to get out and do a really detailed survey of all the sandstone outcrops or something like that, or all the revetments. But, for the most part, I think we're just going to try and get some stuff set up so that this isn't another plan that the city's written that says you need to do beach monitoring, and it hasn't been done since the 90s. So we'll try and get something.
David, can I ask you a question?
Certainly.
Sorry.
That's okay.
When do you anticipate finishing up all of your research and giving us all of your recommendations?
So we're going to take feedback here. It went to Coastal Commission, so we're waiting to get their feedback. We've had really good discussions with staff about this project in particular. We've done some really innovative approaches and modeling that they're kind of looking at as sort of state of the science and state of the practice. They're giving it a really detailed look, but we should get those back probably end of February, I'm guessing. And so hopefully, spring, hopefully end of March. April Fool's Day is one of my favorite days of the year.
So that would give us, and if you're looking at end of March and Planning Commission is looking to start to act on this in summer or fall, that's giving them 3 to 6 months at most.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything dramatic that's going to change in terms of the content. There might be add some stuff, or I don't know if that can go, but most of the findings are pretty concrete. I don't think there's going to be I don't anticipate any major changes. We've had a couple reports go to the Coastal Commission, and they're like, that's cool, can you fix, there's a spelling error on page 7 or something like that. So, again, we don't know, but I don't anticipate major changes. Certainly enough pieces here and some policy recommendations in there that we can start drafting policies.
So it's my understanding then that you'll be coming back to us with your recommendations. We'll consider what those recommendations are, and we'll make decisions on how we think we should go forward, what path that we should take.
Yeah, I
And
think
then-
there's how much of the pathway and recommendations and sort of, we've presented a lot of steps. What steps do we take first? And that would be guidance that, you guys, I don't know how it works. You guys give to them, they give to council, council says go forth. So I
Right.
think those next steps and where do we, how we fund the nourishment study, for example, if that, monitoring, we're gonna start getting on that. So some of these things will just have to be determined that way. And then, again, once some of the results of those, then, if anybody's like, we really don't like any of that, I don't know what we do then.
Okay, I'm just trying to look at the
Yeah.
timing part of it. So
Yeah.
it depends, you getting it to us first, us
Yeah,
looking at it, reviewing it,
yeah.
deciding a
It's-
path
It's on the website
forward.
now, yeah.
When,
It's
can I
out.
just ask a
Is it-
quick question on this, following this? So when you're coming back to the planning commission, you're projecting this next presentation in the summer, fall, is that just gonna be regarding the adaptation part, or that's not gonna be the policy part?
Policies.
It's gonna be the policies.
Yeah.
So
So
what is
we're
gonna
working
be,
on the
is there
policy.
gonna, you're working on the policies now. So what is the process for input on the policies from the commissions? I mean, are we expected to do that at this meeting?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not, I don't know about anybody else, it's a lot of information to
Right.
digest.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm certainly not ready to give any
EMC,
policy
yes, so our
recommendations.
consulting team is, they're working on the draft policies. And once they have the policies in place that are presentable, they'll bring it to the planning commission, and then.
So at the meeting here in the summer, fall, that would be the opportunity for input from the commission on the
Yes.
policies?
Yeah.
Okay, I
I
just
mean,
wanted to
if you
understand that.
have any guidance, or information, this report won't be finished in, for a couple of months. And so if there's some information that you want to provide, we will post the final adaptation on the website. It's through the Public Works Department. Environmental Programs is where all of the different documents are placed. But I don't believe we have another presentation of these strategies, the actual
Well-
strategies.
Well, I would make a suggestion that we have another joint meeting when you bring the policies back, because there's been a lot of good comments here and from these people, and I think that, that would be a better opportunity to repeat this kind of a forum to put input on the policies that are presented.
Okay.
So that's what I'm gonna push for. Okay? Go ahead, Kelly.
I have a question on, could you go back a few slides? It was like your immediate next steps or your immediate suggestions. I think it said immediate on the title. I think as you're working on the
This
back.
one, recommended
Recommended,
plans, recommended studies.
Immediate actions.
Okay.
So I recall a couple years ago, we did a walk along the beach and we saw this fourth area looked like this a few years ago, right? We could see the revetments had some deferred maintenance, et cetera. And I think it would be really, it was interesting, we've learned, and we've had some conversations about this at Forest and Beach, that as a city, we used to do proactive work in the wintertime to help shore up, or before winter, to help try and protect the beach, to mitigate the sand loss.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure when that stopped, but it was, okay, 2015. So it's been gone for a while now, a decade,
Yeah.
right? And so we, in Forest and Beach, had asked to have just a review of what did we used to do and how was that helpful? And I don't know if any of the things we used to do would be helpful today, but I heard the reason all of that stopped was that we didn't have budget for it. So the beach has deferred maintenance. We have deferred maintenance
Yeah.
all over our town, but the beach definitely has some deferred maintenance. And so it would be really helpful when you talk about these immediate actions. Some of these are immediate because, like our seawall on the south end of the beach now, like, we had storms 2 years ago where the water was all the way at the top of the wall. So
Yeah.
we're already experiencing in Carmel what you had in some of those pictures is like future scenarios
Yeah.
are here. So I think if there's any way to highlight where we have deferred maintenance, what the immediacy of some of those needs might be, and rough estimates of what they could cost. You know, when we walked on the beach a few years ago, the team said, oh, we'd have to have another study to tell you how much it would cost, right? But I think for people who are, just as a practical matter, some range of cost would be
Yeah.
useful. Because what I seem to recall is it was tens upon tens of millions of dollars to go
Yeah.
in and address these.
So, phase one, task two report? I think there was, we did, when we first started, one of the first tasks was every inch of armoring condition.
Right.
And sort of, that really highlighted where immediate action was recommended. And that, some of that, I believe, may have ended up in this current contract to do some coastal engineering around. I'm not sure all of those details yet. We're gonna kind of be helping the city navigate that and some geotech so we can start to get some of these answers.
But I don't think
but-
we've done anything yet, right? And so I
there-
think
yeah.
just making sure that highlighting what's immediate and needs attention and rough costs could really help us
Yeah.
within the
Okay.
community become advocates and take action. Because when
Yeah.
it's like, oh, this would be nice to do, it doesn't have the same impact, that's
Right.
all. So some kind of plan around
Yeah, I don't
would be
think,
I talked
helpful.
to Greg Ambrosi about how much it used to cost them to
Yeah.
do that sort of movement of sand around. And so we have some of that done.
yeah, okay. We can maybe get pull a couple pieces together and, you know, let staff present some of that we have readily, that we've kind of already done in our workflows. And the cost estimating, you know, I think all of it probably costs $10 million, but, you know, maybe 20% really needs to be done in the next 5 years. And so, how do you phase that?
Let me
Yeah.
give you an example. This is not very complicated to do that. You can do it on a napkin, right?
Yeah.
So you take the size of the beach, right? And I'm a little concerned that you don't know the size of the beach, but let's say it's a mile long and it's about 300 feet wide, in average. I did the numbers. We need about 60,000 tons of sand to raise it 1 foot. Now, you're saying that the erosion is 3 feet or whatever for the tree that you were mentioning, right? 3 feet is 180,000 tons of sand. Now, you look it up, and there's a standard Cape-size vessel that you can rent that will bring you 180,000 ton of whatever to the bay. My understanding is that you only need to dump it, and then the nature will take care of distributing the sand. So the cost of bringing a ship with 180,000 tons into the bay and dumping it, shouldn't be that high. It shouldn't be 10 million. It should be more like less than $1 million, maybe $500,000.
There's a range of other costs in there, and if there was no regulatory considerations, mitigation requirements, then just doing it wouldn't be, you know, I'd say probably 3 to 5 million is probably a better ballpark rough estimate without doing a lot of that. There's all kinds of unknowns about regulatory viability permits, impacts, all of that. So I love the pragmatic approach there. And, you know, some places the sand needs 5 feet, some places it needs 10 feet, and so it's variable.
But the waves distribute the sand. My understanding is that over the year it will be distributed.
Yeah, it definitely sorts it,
Yeah.
but, you know, we want to put it on the back of the beach, so you can't just dump it because it doesn't get to the back of the beach as quickly. We want it on top, up on the sand ramps so that we're maintaining a lot of volume of sand for a longer period of time as it slowly trickles down. And that also reduces a lot of the impacts to the beach and ecosystem and habitats that often drive mitigation costs and extra fees up. So there's a lot of other considerations. And then what it's gonna take to get the sand. Because if we're going offshore in a marine environment, that's a lot more than, or if we're barging it down from British Columbia, or, you know, there's a lot of other, I won't say hidden costs, but the volume, you know, and availability, and I'm impressed you got that far in that short of time. There's some very back of the envelope stuff.
No, but it's important to understand the impact on the community, because when you tell people we're gonna bring a new beach, they're thinking of trucks blocking Highway 1, they're thinking about all the traffic congestions and parking issues.
Right.
And it's nothing like that. If we bring it over the ocean, there will be no traffic impact at all,
Right.
right? So,
Right, but we're kind of getting the cart in front of the horse here,
Yeah.
because we have
That is definitely
there's
a
going
high
to be a
priority.
long review process here. There's going to be capital improvement studies.
Yeah.
And once we get down to a specific product, as you've mentioned, there's a lot of regulatory oversight that goes on. So, but I really want to commend you, the amount of work that you've done and presented to us. This is really amazing work. So I'm very impressed. I'm sure everybody is. At any rate, unless there's, we've got a couple of questions, and let's kind of wrap it up,
Yes, please, thank you.
or comments, or two.
I have a question, and thank you for your presentation and also all your studies and work. You mentioned coastal hazard overlay zone. And at Carmel, we have a beach and riparian overlay zone. Could you please explain the difference between the two?
I'm not as familiar with the beach overlay zone as much. I haven't been working on the policy stuff too deeply yet. The coastal hazard overlay zone, I'll kind of use the example you used of a basement. If you had a coastal hazard overlay, you know, that can often trigger additional reporting requirements. And
Forgive me, no,
Yeah,
I
okay,
understand. What I was interested in is how it differs from what we already have.
Oh.
And are there other municipalities that are doing this?
Yes, there's quite a few that I've worked with. I think Ventura County, Marina.
Great, so we have some,
There's
we
others
have
that have
examples
coastal
that we
hazard
can.
overlays, and it's usually additional reporting requirements if you're in there. Like if you're gonna dig a basement, how is it gonna affect cliff stability?
Perfect.
Answering some of those, and then also sort of some of the hazard disclosures.
Of course, thank you,
yeah.
thank you. And I also, and I had a request actually for Ms. Bilsey, as we're going forward. And your staff report, I love a summary with 4 bullet points. I think that's awesome. And there are quite a few recommendations in the report today about immediate actions and near-term actions, you know, broken up in the 3 zones. I think that, at least for me as a planning commissioner, it would be extraordinarily helpful if there was a summary just of those actions, the immediate and near term, especially those, you know, for instance, part of the report says, you know, in the near term, the city must, and that's a rather strong word, right? Must, you know, commit to long-term monitoring and maintain existing armoring and so on and so on. So I think the next time we review this, I think it would be very, very helpful to have a city-specific summary.
Sure.
That will, we can refer then to this larger report, but that may help focus us on what to address. So
Sure,
thank you.
thank you.
Okay, I'm going to just ask the public if they have any questions one last time. And you have a question, Commissioner Allen? Go ahead.
I don't have a question, I just have a comment on the cameras and your reference to monitoring the beaches. I think in this community, you're gonna get a ton of pushback for that. So I love the Coast Snap option of where somebody can take a picture and submit it versus cameras monitoring the beaches. I wouldn't go with that.
Okay, Yes, point noted. We'll bring sort of options, and you guys can discuss.
We good? Okay, I want to thank everybody for their presentation, and I think we are adjourned. So Tamara, I didn't quite understand what you were.